Good evening and welcome to the first candidate forum held by Sandy Springs Together. Thank you for attending Sandy Springs Together's first Georgia State House Candidate Forum. We have invited all 8 candidates for House of Representatives for the state of Sandy Springs districts. And tonight we have 4 of the 8 who will be taking part in our event. We want to thank the candidates for joining us. Here to welcome you tonight is Melanie Couchman with Sandy Springs Together. Melanie, take it away.
Thank you, Donna. Sandy Springs Together is pleased to host tonight's forum. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit focused on educating, engaging, and empowering the community on racial equity and social justice issues. You can learn more by going to our website at sandysprings-together.org. Getting to know our elected officials and using our power to vote those whom we feel will best represent our values and beliefs is the best way to fight injustice and racism. We encourage everyone to get out and vote. Absentee ballots are the safest way to vote. And in Fulton County, absentee ballots are processed as they're received. And you can vote right now with an absentee ballot. So no waiting on election day to see the impact your vote will have. Now it gives me great pleasure to turn this over to our moderator, Donna Lowry. Donna is a communications consultant and an esteemed journalist. She spent nearly 30 years at WXIA TV, 11 Alive News, the NBC affiliate, where she created the award-winning Class Act and Class Notes segments. Donna has won 7 regional Emmy Awards, as well as an induction in the prestigious NATAS Silver Circle, recognizing her lasting contribution to the broadcast industry. Currently, she serves as host of GPB's Lawmakers. Donna, I'll turn the program back over to you.
Thank you, Melanie. Recent studies have shown that the Atlanta metro area leads the nation in income inequality and lack of economic mobility. COVID-19 has exacerbated this wealth gap. Over 9,000 residents in Fulton County are currently in the pipeline for eviction when the eviction moratorium expires on December 31st. Housing is the major expense for most people, regardless of whether they are a renter or a homeowner. We have all seen the statistics of COVID-19 hitting our Black and brown neighbors the hardest because many of them are essential workers who are required to work during the pandemic. In Sandy Springs, 40% of our overall population is non-white. Our public schools are 73% non-white, and 45% of our public school students are economically disadvantaged. 43% of our renters are paying more than 30% of their income for rent. Solving this problem of preserving and increasing the supply of affordable housing is felt most acutely at the local level. However, there are states making intentional decisions to help municipalities find solutions. Sandy Springs Together is hopeful that our state legislature will also find ways to support our cities in this challenge. We are looking forward to learning how our candidates see their role in supporting affordable housing. Now, I would like each candidate to take 1 minute to introduce themselves to our audience, and let's begin in order of your district number. So we'll begin with District 45 and Representative Josh McLaren. I'm sorry, I gave the wrong district number for you, Josh. I'm going to apologize for that. We're going to begin with Sarah Tyndall Gazelle with District 45.
Thank you so much, Donna, and I'm so pleased to be here with you tonight. My name is Sarah Tyndall Gazelle, and I am the Democratic nominee for State House District 45. I am a mom of 2 teenage daughters. I am an attorney and I'm an advocate with a background in voting rights. Before I launched my campaign, I was the voter protection director for the statewide Democratic Party in 2018 and 2019. So that's a lot of what I bring to the table because your vote is your voice, and making sure that every single eligible voter has access to the ballot box so that we can all make sure that our government reflects our people and our population and our vision for the future of Georgia. So I'm really grateful to be here tonight. My District 45 crosses the county line, so I have both Sandy Springs and East Cobb. So I'm eager to have a chance to talk about Sandy Springs in particular. Thank you.
Oh, we're happy to have you tonight. Thank you so much. Now, Representative Josh McLaurin, District 51.
Thank you, Donna. My name is Josh McLaurin. I am currently the state representative for House District 51, which is parts of Sandy Springs, Roswell, and Johns Creek. I was first elected this past cycle in 2018 in the general election, and I'm really excited to be running again. There's so much work to be done, and I love living in Sandy Springs as what I consider to be sort of a community in transition. It's a community between the outer suburbs and the inside of the perimeter. It is a community that has both single-family housing and multifamily housing in the form of apartment complexes and condos and that sort of thing. So it's a real opportunity, both in Georgia but also nationally, for experimenting and also just brainstorming, innovating the types of policies that we need in a rapidly changing American suburb. And so I think it's an exciting opportunity both for elected officials but also for residents of all different backgrounds, all different income levels, to come together and talk about how we're going to address these real problems. So I'm excited to participate tonight.
Well, thank you for being here. We're glad to have you here. All right, next, District 52, Shay Roberts.
Hi, thank you, Donna. I'm so happy to be here with you and our fellow panelists, Melanie. I am I'm the Democratic nominee for State House District 52, which is wholly encompassed in Fulton County. It does include some of North Atlanta, but the largest part is in Sandy Springs. I am an attorney, a small business owner, a licensed realtor, and a mother of 3 in a blended family with my husband and law partner, Brian. I wear a lot of hats every day. But being an attorney for 25 years has kind of taught me how to fight for what's right. My kids are why I'm fighting. I feel like we are not really seeing a world that I want to leave them in the future. And so I ran for the seat in 2018. Parkland was kind of what sparked my jumping into the race. But having been a zoning attorney for more than 20 years, I've essentially lobbied city and county legislators on land use issues for a long time. So affordable housing is very important to me, and I've been working to explore different options, and I look forward, like Josh said, to bringing lots of folks to the table to figure out how we can make sure we maintain our affordable housing and increase our different housing options here in Sandy Springs.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. We're glad you're here. Finally, District 80, Representative Matt Wilson.
Thanks so much, Donna, and thank you, Sandy Springs Together, for hosting this and for inviting me. It's a real treat to be able to discuss this very important issue in a hopefully a substantive way with some friendly faces. My name is Matthew Wilson. I am the state representative for District 80. That covers almost all of Brookhaven, a good chunk of Sandy Springs, a small bit of half a neighborhood in Chamblee, 2 City of Atlanta voters, the land under 285 in Dunwoody, and I am in 7, count them, 7 different local delegations. Gerrymandering at its finest. So we'll see if that holds in 2021. I'm running for re-election, and affordable housing is definitely an issue that I've been one of the reasons why I ran. I live and work on Buford Highway in Brookhaven, and so affordable housing is a very big issue for our local community. I know it is for Sandy Springs as well. It's something that I've been glad to be able to work on just in my first term. And hoping to work on in a lot bigger ways in the future. So I'm glad that we're having this discussion tonight.
Well, thank you very much. We're glad you're here. So let's get started. Tonight's forum will consist of a series of questions submitted by experts in the field of affordable housing. We will have 4 topics: defining affordable housing, suggestions for a state strategy to address affordable housing, funding for affordable housing, and protecting safe, decent, and stable affordable housing. Before I ask each question, I will give a brief explanation as to why the question is important to addressing the affordable housing issue in Georgia. So let's start with question 1, defining affordable housing. We have all heard the term affordable housing, but there are many, many definitions. How do you define affordable housing? And each candidate, I will give you 1 minute each. Let's begin with where we ended with Representative Matt Wilson.
It's a great question to start with. You know, for me, I think how you define affordable housing, it's a moving target. It can mean a lot of different things because it means a lot of different things to different families based on what situation they're in, which can change over time, right? As we know, the pandemic has changed the housing situation for a lot of families in our community. But you know, at its core, I think it means that in our community, our Atlanta community, our Metro Atlanta community, Sandy Springs, if you want to be hyper local, that a family, a working family, can afford to live and enjoy the fruits of our community. You know, and that means that we've got to have a mix of different housing. That means that probably there's some government assistance type programs that are available, but it's ensuring that the community is accessible to the people who currently live here and the people who want to live here.
All right, thank you very much. Next, the question for Shay Roberts.
So I think what I would argue is that, you know, we're supposed to look at it from the standpoint that people shouldn't pay more than 30% of their total household income on housing. And right now in Georgia, if a person earning minimum wage would have to work 105 hours per week to afford a 2-bedroom rental. People earning 50% or less than the median income are holding on to the apartments right now that the folks earning 30% or less need, because we don't have any middle income type housing. We have lots of luxury apartments and luxury new buildings. We have lots of single family homes. But what we need to do is get more creative in building more affordable housing that can fit each income level, because the wage gap is unbelievable. So yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Representative Josh McLaurin.
Thank you. So I think that there's a range of ways to answer this, and you've heard a couple, and there's a kind of a more mathematical way. I know there's kind of an industry standard definition that if somebody with less than 60% of the area median income is able to afford housing, meaning that it's less than 30% of their overall income, then that's affordable. And then you've got workforce housing, which is another term that has emerged, which refers to folks who work in various sectors that are, you know, maybe considered middle class, or people consider themselves to be of average income. From a 60% to 120% of area median income is a number I've heard used before for that. But these numbers and these targets, again, are designed to get at what Matthew was talking about, which is we want to make sure that people can live, work, and play in the same community, and that we're not creating this strained, and I know everyone in Metro Atlanta really understands this intuitively, this like stretched out network of commuting where people live further outside always, drive in for their jobs, drive in for amenities, and then go back out to a bedroom community. I think everyone intuitively who's sat in traffic in Georgia knows that that is kind of an unsustainable situation. I'll probably talk more about this later tonight when it comes to Sandy Springs, but that's part of what it means to be in transition in a gateway community, is how do we resolve that tension so that people who want to live, work, and play in Sandy Springs can do that.
All right, thank you very much. And now Sarah Tyndall Gazelle.
Well, when you go last after 3 brilliant people, it's hard to have something new to say. But I think my colleagues really captured it. Yes, you can look at it as a formula at 30% of your income, but because we have such broad differentials in income in Georgia, that means that every community, and in fact from household to household, what is affordable will be different. And you can't have, there is no one size fits all solution, but we do need to be looking at our communities holistically. And especially, I really want to emphasize what Representative McLaurin said. We can't. It is our current system of having pockets where people are the people in our community that we rely on, the workforce, whether it's first responders or teachers or the folks who are feeding us during the pandemic, can't afford to live in our communities because there is no housing that they can attain. And then without transportation networks, it is unsustainable. And with the growth that's projected in Atlanta, it's a critical problem that has to be addressed.
All right, thank you very much. The next question. It will focus on state strategy to address affordable housing. Now, the lack of affordable housing is a national problem that requires pulling resources from many places. Cities cannot be left to solve this problem on their own. What should be the state's single most important strategy to help cities keep their housing affordable for residents from all income levels? And what will you do to move that strategy forward? And let's begin with Shay Roberts. You'll have 2 minutes, by the way.
I wasn't unmuted. Okay. Single most strategy. Wow, that's hard to pick one. I think it's going to require multiple strategies and creativity. I could see us offering some tax credits for low income, middle income tax breaks. But one thing as a zoning attorney that I would like to look at is maybe some creative overlay districts that relate to offering up more creative options for housing, like the accessory dwelling units that are becoming very popular in other states. A lot of single family homes could have room in their backyard or they could convert a garage, and they could rent it out at a lower rate, and it would help with the housing, the middle and the low affordable housing options, since we have so much single family here. But right now our Sandy Springs zoning ordinances don't have that creativity in it. If that's one area, I just think we need to start looking at also bringing in more public transit options into Sandy Springs. We have the trifecta. We're not paying a livable wage. We don't really have public transit that efficiently and effectively connects people. And so 67%, I think, of our traffic coming into Sandy Springs is from outside of Sandy Springs. And so it's a multi-pronged look at a lot of different things in my mind. So.
All right, thank you very much. Representative McLaurin.
Sure. So I think the point I would stress about a state level response is, I agree with you and the premise to the question. A state level response is necessary because housing is a regional problem. Housing is a problem that implicates, as Shay just said, transit. You can't have a conversation about housing without talking about networks of transportation and modalities, and how are people going to get from home to work and back. So if one city alone tries to plan for that big of a problem, inevitably it will fail. I mean, in a metro area like Atlanta, you have GDOT, which is spending millions and millions of dollars to shape the landscape of how people get around every single year, and sometimes many years in advance, as people know from the 285 and the 400 projects. So we have to have some sort of state level planning or coordination to be talking about transit at the same time we're talking about housing, at the same time we're talking about workforce development. And it has to be a strategy where multiple local governments are willing to come together and agree on planning that implicates more than one of them at a time.
All right, thank you very much. Sarah Tyndall Gazelle. 2 minutes.
Thank you. So again, I reinforce what my colleagues have said, but there are a number of steps that the state can and should take. State involvement is necessary, but not sufficient, because these answers involve local government, county government, municipal government, but they also involve the private sector. The state cannot do this without strong public-private partnerships on this. And we certainly can't address affordable housing if we are cutting in half the tax incentives or the tax credits for developers to actually build or redevelop affordable housing, which is what the legislature was contemplating just a couple of months ago. So that's a big step that the legislature, that we need to maintain those tax credits. We also need to look at creating incentives for set-asides for developers as they are creating new developments or redeveloping. They can have plenty of high income or moderate income housing, but also make sure that they have a required minimum of affordable housing within these same developments. But that requires a partnership. The city of Atlanta has been doing this quite a lot in some of their redevelopment, but the state needs to support and make sure that these are policies that we move forward.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Matt Wilson.
So I think, you asked what should the state's single most strategy be. I think it is that we have to make affordable housing a priority. My three colleagues beautifully illustrated the many facets that this issue touches on, right? It cuts across geography, it cuts across levels of government, it cuts across a myriad of different spectrums. One thing that I think the state can do is I'd love to see the state have one person who is in charge of affordable housing and setting a strategy for the state. The governor should have one person that he can look to on this issue. If you think about it, we have a whole department for economic development, and it takes a big chunk of money from our state budget every year. Its director is one of the highest paid state employees. We have a whole department dedicated to building roads and bridges. These are all things that are affecting our ability to have affordable housing in our communities, but we don't have anyone looking out for affordable housing and making sure that they're able to bring together all the different agencies and departments who are focused on all these other issues, but that all touch back on affordable housing to make sure that someone's actually looking out for the issue that's being impacted there. So I would love to see that develop, and that can look like a lot of different things. It can be a governor just appointing one person. It could be a commissioner, but I'd love to continue the conversation about that.
Right, thank you very much. Let's move on to the next question. This question comes from a renters group. It's called the Carlisle Residents Alliance. We always hear politicians addressing issues like housing, education, and economic development. As a country, we have now what happens to be, and I apologize, I lost my place there. As a country, we have, oh goodness. I apologize, I have lost my place. We now have what happens to these issues. As a country, I'll start again. We have now seen what happens to these issues when a national disaster strikes. We certainly have, like a current pandemic that we're dealing with right now. So the question has to be, is it clear that there was no plan for that, no foresight on the part of our policymakers at the local, state, and federal levels? As a result, many Georgians are now experiencing housing insecurity. Small businesses are struggling to keep their doors open, and public schools are barely educating our students. So how will you apply the lessons as a nation about the importance of preparation and long-term planning to your policies going forward? For each candidate, you'll have 2 minutes. And let's begin on this third question with Representative Josh McLaurin.
Thank you. I think the single biggest lesson that we learned with respect to housing at the onset of the pandemic is that housing security is public health. The two things cannot be separated from one another. For one thing, housing is sort of like, we talk about voting, that voting is like a foundational right that gives rise to other rights. Housing is a type of security that gives rise to other types of security. It's very difficult to find and hold down a job when you don't know if the place where you live is stable. And you can imagine a number of other things just like that in terms of security that comes from having a place where you live. Well, particularly during a pandemic when we pose risks to one another. I mean, it's so sad, right? Even our dear friends and family, we pose risks to just by being around them. Well, if you are evicted from where you live, or if you have to leave for some reason and you don't know where you're going to spend the night, you know, in a worst case scenario, you might have to go to a shelter or some sort of public or nonprofit type solution. But again, then you're mixing around with other people. And in general, just being displaced and not having a safe place to shelter in place during, for example, when the governor ordered people to stay home, which was a public health measure designed to save lives. Well, again, if you don't have a home, it's hard to do that. So I think we need a paradigm shift when it comes to thinking about housing as an integral piece, not just of public health in a pandemic, but of public health generally. That if we want to take care of communities, we should be thinking of the housing insecurity that does exist as an open wound that we have to attend to urgently. And we can't pretend that we can do things like I appreciate the question about talking points, essentially. We can't do things like grow jobs or unleash the economy or whatever it is that politicians say until we have built a foundation for our communities to do that.
All right, thank you very much. Next, we'll have Sarah Tyndall Gazelle.
Thank you so much. So the question is what lesson we've learned and how to approach disasters in the future. Well, the biggest lesson that I have learned from this is you can't solve any of the ancillary effects of a disaster without addressing the disaster to begin with. The reason that Georgia is looking so much harder and is at so much higher risk than some other states with housing insecurity and our education and small businesses suffering is because we never address the underlying cause of this massive insecurity to begin with, not in a holistic way, and we're still not doing it in a serious way. If you can't address the underlying public health problem, it is going to exacerbate the problem for months. We could have looked like other countries. It didn't have to be this way. We could have taken this pandemic seriously from the beginning. We could have taken the hit, and yes, this is where government needs to step in and take care of its citizens when there is a once in a century, I pray it's once in a century crisis. That is the role of government. That is the role of leadership, to take charge, to lead the population into taking the steps that are necessary to get the pandemic under control. We've seen across the world, other countries have been able to do this. Other countries are not facing the massive problems in employment, in education, in healthcare, and in housing that we are, because we fundamentally failed, and the government fundamentally failed to address the issue to begin with.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Matt Wilson, 2 minutes.
You know, my colleagues have said it a lot better than I could, but I certainly agree with them. Representative McLaurin used the phrase paradigm shift, and I'm going to steal that phrase and use it in a completely different way that he did not intend. But I think that the biggest lesson that we learned from this was that we do need a paradigm shift, but a slightly different one. We have to have leaders who understand that ultimately this is about people and taking care of people, and that government has a role in this issue. That is a foundational hurdle that we must overcome if we're going to actually tackle this problem in any way. Because Representative McLaurin and I will tell you that a lot of our colleagues at the State House, and certainly in state government, have a much more minimal view of government's role in our local communities and what government should be doing. And that is a conversation that we have to have and talk about. And we've got to have leaders. We must elect leaders who feel, empowered and feel that it is their role to do something about this issue, and not just say, I'm sorry, government can't help you. You need to go to the church down the street. Yeah, the church down the street is going to help you, but government needs to be at the table as well. Because don't forget, you send a lot of your money to the state government, some of it should be used to benefit you and your community.
All right, thank you very much. Shay Roberts.
Well, first of all, I think we need to elect leaders that actually listen to scientists and medical experts. That has been the fundamental failure in this entire response. Last time I checked, if somebody practiced law without a license, I went to law school for 3 years, it's against the law. I don't understand how politicians have suddenly gone to medical school and become smarter than their own public health officials that are being paid by our tax dollars. If we had shut down earlier and gotten the numbers down and not opened first and implemented mask requirements and contact tracing and all of those things, we would have our kids back at school and our parents back at work, and we wouldn't be in the economic crisis that we are now. But our leaders politicized masks, and they've made it just such a divisive issue that it should not be that hard to put a piece of cloth over your face to protect your neighbor or your family. And so now we find ourselves in this situation where small businesses are closing for good. I mean, they're not going to come back. So that's another piece that I think we need to look at is finding longer term solutions that help small businesses, because they're the backbone of this country and they employ the largest percentage of Americans. And so I think we need to start looking at helping them with counseling, adapting their businesses in this world that we're living in right now. And, you know, this housing situation, I agree with Josh that it's a problem that we need to address as a government, because it is a necessity, just like food, just like healthcare, and they're all so interconnected, and we've got to do a better job of taking care of our people right now and reprioritizing our tax dollars especially. So.
All right, thank you very much. Question number 4. It's dealing with funding for new affordable housing. Funding for affordable housing must come from multiple sources: the state, federal, city, and philanthropic organizations. The state of Georgia provides low-income housing tax credits, or LIHTC, for developers of affordable housing. The money is used to enable them to build housing that is affordable. So currently, the state low-income housing tax credit matches the federal LIHTC and is critical for funding development of affordable housing. It is possible in the next legislative session that a proposal will be made to cut the low-income housing tax credit. Will you support or oppose efforts to reduce the state's LIHTC, and explain your reason behind the answer? And we'll just have a minute from each one of you on this one, and we'll start with Sarah Tyndall Gazelle.
Thank you so much. This is a very easy question. I oppose cutting that. While yes, there are definitely areas where we can tighten up in the state budget and try to recover some of the costs that we are lost, this is not one of the areas to do it. This is, our citizens rely on this, and so do our developers. This is one of those public-private partnerships that remains critical to make sure that housing is affordable and available to especially our most vulnerable population.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Matt Wilson.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, you know, one of the proposals that I've supported both years that I've been privileged to serve is a bill that would require a study of all the tax credits that the state gives out. Right now, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of tax credits that the state gives out. And a lot of them we know do not work, are not doing what we were told they would do when the legislature voted to put them in place. But it's a handout to somebody, right? And some corporation wanted it, or some special interest group. So one of the things that I supported was a bill that would say, let's take a look at these tax credits. And when you pass a tax credit, you know, every 5 years or so, you've got to take a look at whether it's actually achieving or helping the state be more efficient. And that's something that I think would help support tax credits that are doing really good work, like the low-income housing tax credit.
All right, thank you very much. Shay Roberts.
Sorry about that. This is an easy question. I would oppose reducing that that tax credit, and I think we need to start looking at how providing affordable housing to our communities actually reduces taxpayer expenses. I mean, affordable community-based housing for seniors and people with disabilities is significantly less than the cost of institutional care. Chronically homeless persons often cycle through jails, hospitals, and other crisis services. We spend $193 million per year on probation and parole revocations right now. We need some serious redistribution of our tax dollars and our priorities on where we're spending them. Affordable housing can improve the health and educational outcomes of low-income families and children, reducing the public costs associated with illness and poor school performance. It's all connected. It's going to create a demand for good jobs. It stimulates the economy. Families living in affordable housing will have more discretionary income to spend on food and clothing and other goods and services. So we just need to change our mindset and not look at it as a handout. It is supporting our community so that we can all support each other.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Josh McLaurin.
Thank you. I also would oppose cutting the credit. And I think this goes back to the conversation we were all having about the role of government. Government for years has been demonized as part of the problem, literally no matter what. Government is just the means that society has chosen to express public preferences collectively. That it's the tool we use when we decide as a community to do something to put that decision into action. So if we want to live by our neighbors, if we really do value diversity of both, not just demographic diversity, but economic, social diversity of perspectives, and we want to live in neighborhoods of all different types of folks, we have to make a decision as a community to secure that outcome. And it's the risk here is not big government. Big government and affordable housing in Georgia doesn't exist yet, not even close. This tax credit is one of the few tools that we have to do the barest minimum to try to make our communities not break down and to stay as diverse as possible. We need to be doing more than this, but at the very least, yes, we're going to oppose efforts to move the ball backwards on affordable housing.
All right, thank you very much. Let's move on to question 5. Resources to preserve current affordable housing is the subject. This question is from the Carlisle Residents Alliance also. Being a renter in North Sandy Springs has become a bit precarious. On the one hand, the pending redevelopment will bring a community center, increased retail options, and more green space. We fear this will happen at the expense of the naturally occurring affordable housing that we call home. If elected, how will you help us protect our place in this community? And each one of you have 2 minutes for this question, and we're going to begin with Representative Matt Wilson.
I knew I was going to go first because I didn't quite understand what the question was.
I can repeat it if you'd like.
Please.
I'll do that, no problem. A question from the Carlisle Residents Alliance. Being as renter in North Sandy Springs has become a bit precarious. On the one hand, the pending redevelopment will bring a community center, increased retail options, and more green space. We fear this will happen at the expense of the naturally occurring affordable housing that we call home. If elected, how will you help us protect our place in this community?
Yeah, so but I certainly can sympathize with that question. I'm a renter in Brookhaven. I live in an apartment complex on Buford Highway. And there is constant development. Brookhaven, very much like Sandy Springs, constant development all around us that is threatening, the continued existence of the complex in which I live. One of the things that I think, one of the things that I would like to continue working on, if reelected, is continuing the conversation with the local government, because the Brookhaven government, and I know this personally, has been very effective at enforcing affordable housing norms in Brookhaven and making it a priority. One example that I'll give you, there is a side street off of Buford Highway. Town home development group wanted to buy up some low-income apartment complexes that are predominantly home to Hispanic families, demolish them, rebuild, $700,000-$800,000 townhomes, and have a few affordable units. And the question is, how are you defining affordable? How are you measuring affordable? Well, they were measuring it off of the median income of a family of four in Atlanta. And Brookhaven said, no. It has to be the median income for a family living on Buford Highway, because that is what this community is, not the broader metro region that brings in all these pockets of wealth. And so, I think the local governments are really on the front lines of these issues, because they're the ones that are giving out the permits to allow development to occur. But the state has a role as well, as we've talked about on this conference call already. And so I want to continue that conversation.
All right, thank you very much. I'm sorry, Shay Roberts.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I know when I was knocking doors in 2018, back when we could canvass before COVID, I'll never forget knocking the door. It was one of the older apartments south in Sandy Springs, and it was this lovely woman and her elderly mom, and they answered the door, and she was almost in tears with me because her son had been at Sandy Springs schools all his life, and he was a junior in high school, and because of the new construction that had gone up around her, her rent had gone up $100 a month. And she worked at the Walgreens, and her salary had not gone up consistent with that. And it's heartbreaking to hear those stories, because she was afraid her son wouldn't get to graduate with his friends. And so it's hard, because so many of these issues are local controlled more by the local government. But I think we need to start looking globally at how we can help folks in these lower socioeconomic areas. We can help them on a state level by fully expanding Medicaid. Should have done 10 years ago. We're one of 12 states left in the country that hasn't fully expanded Medicaid. We could be insuring 470,000 Georgians. We could create 56,000 new jobs and help with these struggling rural hospitals. If people can have health care, that helps them function better in the world. If we could add public transportation that actually gets them where they need to go, so they're not sitting in the car for as long, or they don't need a car, which is an added cost. There's all kinds of ways that we can work to reduce and help these folks in other areas that I think will translate. But then we also need to look at possibly a state, local philanthropy kind of housing trust that we can start getting creative with to help maybe making some of these new units, like I talked about, these accessory dwelling units, or special developments where we rehab some older buildings. Okay, sorry.
No problem. Thank you so much. Representative McLaurin.
So I represent the north end of Sandy Springs, and lots of complexes up there. And I have been very involved with watching the progression of planning in Sandy Springs and the amenities there, public access to greenways, ideas about doing things near the river, really nice ideas. And proponents of these ideas sometimes will say, well, how can you oppose any of this? It's just making the area nicer, and don't you want that? Are you opposed to making an area nicer? Well, no, nobody's opposed to making an area nicer. What people are concerned about is equity. We're concerned about whether everybody gets to share in those improvements. And maybe a quick analogy might be, if you need to feed 100 people and 80 of them have food already and 20 don't, maybe we shouldn't be having a conversation about how the 80 people who already have food can have slightly nicer food. Maybe the first thing we should do is talk about whether we can feed the 20. And if that's something that we are able to do to our satisfaction ethically, that we feel like the whole community is being taken care of, then we can have a conversation about making everything nicer for everybody. But this really does come down to some fundamental values. I mean, really, what's more important? do you care more about having an inclusive community where everybody feels like they have an equal say in what's happening? Or do we just want to make things nicer just for the sake of making them nicer without thinking about, how is that going to impact the marketplace for housing? How is it going to impact our neighbors? And that's a difficult question. My opponent might be able to take this video and clip it and make an ad out of it, because it's very easy to simplify the messaging and say, well, people are opposed to progress. It's not about being opposed to progress. It's about wanting progress to be inclusive.
All right, thank you very much. Sarah Tyndall Gazelle.
Well, once again, at the tail end, my colleagues have made such great, fantastic points. But I will say that this speaks partly to my conception of what being a state representative really is. At the State House, there's not a huge amount specifically for the north end of Sandy Springs and the redevelopment, which is also part of my district. That is right in the middle of that. But being a representative means you represent your constituents and you make sure that they have a seat at the table. So you make sure that they are part of the conversation as well. And if that means bringing the conversation to them, then that's what you do. I'm so grateful to the work that Sandy Springs Together has been doing on exactly this. I have been engaging in some of these community forums and trying to listen right now to understand what the local population wants, and that's what I would continue to do as their elected representative. And as Representative Wilson said, a lot of these decisions are made at the municipal level with zoning boards. Well, sometimes folks need an advocate. And that's what I'm here to do, is to advocate for all of the residents of the district, because there are competing interests. So we need to look at them and we need to look at the equities and make sure that all of the residents are having their needs met. And if that certainly means not pricing folks out of the market. These are their homes. These are the schools where their kids go to. They need to be able to continue with this. And they need to be supported everywhere, and particularly with housing, and making sure that their voices are heard as the redevelopment plans move forward. We can't leave these folks behind.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to the next question. When redevelopment occurs in older neighborhoods, often in the older, more established housing and businesses, they are forced out. The older, more established housing and businesses are forced out due to higher taxes, higher rents, and changing demographics. This results in large groups of people being displaced and small businesses going out of business. Would you support or oppose measures to preserve housing affordability in gentrifying communities by providing resources, incentivizing the preservation of the original businesses and naturally occurring affordable rental housing? And we'll begin with Jay Roberts.
I was unmuted. Can you read the question one more time? I apologize.
Sure. They're long, so I get it.
Yeah.
When redevelopment occurs in older neighborhoods, oftentimes the older, more established housing and businesses are forced out due to higher taxes, higher rents, and changing demographics. This results in large groups of people being displaced and small businesses going out of business. Would you support or oppose measures to preserve housing affordability in gentrifying communities by providing resources to incentivize the preservation of original businesses and naturally occurring affordable rental housing, and why?
Okay, I thought I heard you correctly. Of course, I would support preserving some of these areas and providing incentives to do that so that people are not forced out of their neighborhoods and their homes. This is just, one of those issues that is so tough. And like Josh said, I'm sure our opponents that didn't care enough to show up and talk about these issues are going to probably use these sound bites against us. And it's not about not being for progress, but there's got to be some displacement measures put into these development plans. We need smart planning. Atlanta was developed backwards, really. I mean, and we don't have the infrastructure in place that we need as far as public transit and some of these things. And so we've got to start incentivizing, making sure that everybody can live where they work and play. And I think that is what we should all strive for. It shouldn't be just, our job shouldn't be just to help people survive. I would like to get to a place where we all start to thrive. So.
All right. Thank you very much. I should have said that you had 2 minutes on that. So if you still have some things to say.
Well, I overtalked last time. You had to cut me off, so I'm good.
No, that's okay. All righty. Representative McLaurin.
Sure. Not only would I support these initiatives, I have introduced and sponsored one of these initiatives. And I didn't do a lot of work to recruit other people to sign my bill because what I wanted to do was start a conversation. I signed a bill by myself in the 2019-2020 session, House Bill 749, and it is exactly the question you asked. It is a bill that is designed to protect naturally occurring affordable housing where it currently exists, because it's already naturally occurring, by preventing any sort of local government interference or assistance with a gentrification process. And so if the market is already threatening naturally occurring affordable housing, or if that's something that we expect might happen long term, what this bill does is say, well, Georgia's governments are not going to do anything to facilitate or hasten that process because we have enough problems on our plate when it comes to affordable housing. We don't need for the state or local governments to be actively trying to make that problem worse. And what I wanted to do with this bill is not force local governments to take any action, but allow local delegations at the state level to decide whether they wanted to designate certain areas as housing protection zones, is a term that was created in the bill. And this is just one idea. I mean, when I say I wanted to start a conversation, we've been saying all night that one of the big problems with this issue area is we're just not talking about it enough. And we're not coming up with value statements, statements of purpose that would shape our policy design and our behavior as legislators. So what I would like to do is get people asking this question, this exact question that we've just been asked, but inside the Capitol on the House floor. What are we doing to protect naturally occurring affordable housing? Do we have funding tools that we can use, more tax style tools, or are there other sources of funding like federal funding that we aren't restricted in distributing to the right places? What are the tools that we have? Because it's like you get a gift from the sky when affordable housing is already there and it's naturally occurring. You don't have to go out of your way to make it. Yeah, but we should be making it, but we should also be protecting it.
All righty. Thank you very much. All right, Sarah Tyndall Gazelle.
Thank you. I really appreciate this question because this is one of those issues that actually crosses the county lines, right? There are certainly areas also in East Cobb, in addition to Sandy Springs, where we see naturally occurring affordable housing, and folks are getting priced out of the market. Their property taxes are going up. They can't afford to stay. And it especially hits seniors very, very hard. And that just simply, we can't have communities where we're forcing some of our vulnerable members out. So I absolutely would support measures that would protect the rising costs, rising taxes, and protect both small businesses that have been there for maybe generations, as well as housing that are affordable and accessible to broad swaths of the community. I would love to see the bill. I'm going to, in fact, pull it tonight that Representative McLaurin has proposed, because I'm interested to look at. I hadn't seen that, and I really want to read more about it. But yes, absolutely, these are critical issues. Gentrification happens all across the metro area. It's not just in downtown Atlanta. It looks different in different communities, but we have to protect our local residents.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Wilson.
And I'll just pick up from where Sarah left off. This is a scenario. This is gentrification, redevelopment of communities, of neighborhoods, is a scenario that Atlanta has seen over and over and over and over and over again. This is not a new problem. This goes back decades and decades. Of course, the further back you go in time, the more overt racism that was involved. And to some extent, there's still a bit of that there. But I say that because this is, we have active gentrification going on right now, but we have examples in our past that we can learn from, and from other neighborhoods that don't even exist anymore in Atlanta that we should be learning from. And one example that popped into my head while I was listening to my colleagues was the neighborhood of Peoplestown. And there are a bunch of neighborhoods and former neighborhoods in South Atlanta in particular that have went through this well before North Atlanta has. And so one of the things that we can do as state government leaders is helping to foster that regional dialogue around this issue, to say, let's learn from some case studies of other neighborhoods in Brookhaven. And I keep going back to Brookhaven, that's where I live. But in Brookhaven, we have a historic community, Linwood Park, that has been it's a historic African-American community and neighborhood within Brookhaven, but very few of the original families, very few African-Americans live in that neighborhood anymore because of gentrification. So this is something that we're talking about as well. It's something that we've got to learn from our past, but we've got to know what our past was.
All righty. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much on that. So we'll get to the next question. This was kind of long, so bear with me on this. It's on protecting safe, decent, affordable, stable housing. Georgia has few tenant protections and some of the highest eviction rates and eviction filing rates in the country. Georgia now is tied for the third fastest time to evict someone of any state in the US. House Bill 1022 was introduced with bipartisan support in 2020, including Representative Matt Wilson as a co-sponsor, but it failed to pass. It will be reintroduced with a new bill number in 2021 and requires notice to a tenant to be made in writing prior to an eviction action being filed. It also provides tenants with a 7-day right to cure prior to the filing of the eviction by paying rent that is due or curing a failure of performance on the lease. Georgia law now provides a requirement of notice, but does not require it to be in writing, and allows the landlord to immediately file an eviction action with the court. Georgia law also provides a 7-day right to cure after the eviction is filed. So, however, once the eviction is filed, tenants must then pay the past due rent, plus court costs, attorney's fees, administrative costs, and all the rest. It can total several $1,000s. Finally, the eviction filing itself, even absent an eviction, makes it very difficult to rent a home because that record follows the family for decades. 40 states, including our neighboring states, have similar laws to what is proposed or was proposed in House Bill 1022. This bill would bring Georgia in line with the rest of the country and with our neighboring states in the Southeast. So the question, will you support or oppose legislation to provide Georgia renters with a written notice and 7 days right to cure prior to a landlord filing for eviction? And this is 1 minute each for each one of you. And we're going to begin with Representative McLaurin.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I would support this legislation, and it helps that it's got some good people on it, right? Obviously, we want to do everything we can to protect renters and to give renters the ability, again, to achieve housing security. And the question is, what kinds of common sense laws can we put in place to do that? I think you've got to always keep in mind when we legislate on landlord-tenant law that landlords have a massive economic and political advantage when it comes to conflicts with tenants because of, number one, their resources and their ability. They do this a lot. They deal with tenant disputes a lot, and so they know the law, they know what they're doing, but they also have access to the legislature in a way that tenants aren't as organized to do. And so it's important for us to be thinking very critically, not just about what we're hearing in the hallways of the Capitol, but also about common sense measures that people like Wilson and I, who are both still tenants, would consider to be fair, without unduly burdening the ability of landlords to provide reasonable housing to people. So finding that balance is key, and I think that 1022 is a measure that would restore some balance and move us in the right direction. So I'd absolutely support it.
All right, thank you very much. Sarah Tyndall Gazelle.
Well, I'm just going to echo Representative McLaurin. This is a matter of due process, and a renter needs notice in writing. They need an opportunity to cure before the burdens become so substantial that they become insurmountable. And when you balance the equities with basically a very short period of time that a landlord would have to wait in addition, it's very clear that the balance, it leans in favor of providing this additional window of opportunity and written notice to renters. I 100% would back this bill.
All right. Representative Wilson, I kind of know where you're going to fall on this, but go ahead.
Yeah, I would absolutely support this bill again, and plan to do so. And I'll say that not to speak for the main sponsor of the bill, but I think one of the reasons why this bill did not move last year is because we were able to move on another tenants' rights bill. And that was HB 346, which we actually got signed into law. That bill, it was effectively tenants, your stereotypical tenants' rights bill for tenants who present a complaint to their landlord. For example, mold is growing in the ceiling, and this bill and now law prevents the landlord from retaliating against them by just kicking them out, making up some excuse saying you're not in compliance with the lease, kicking them out, bringing someone else in, and never actually fixing the problem. So you're forcing tenants to live in substandard housing. This allows for them to recover 1 month's rent plus $500 plus court costs plus attorney's fees to really penalize those landlords. And I think because we were able to get that through, we weren't able to move on 1022, but certainly hope that we will be continuing that fight, and certainly hope that we'll be able to get it passed next year.
All right, time on that. Thank you very much. Shay Roberts.
So being last, there's always so little to say. I would definitely support this bill. I have been both a landlord and a tenant in my life, and it doesn't really seem fair that they aren't given the same sort of notice and rights to cure, and just the fact that it follows them for so long, to me, also points out a lot of the systems that are in place that just seem to prejudice the lower socioeconomic groups. I mean, we don't have that same requirement that if a slumlord, treats a tenant poorly, it's going to follow them around for 10 years. But yet, again, we have the highest probation and parole numbers in the country. And it's so hard for these people to rehabilitate themselves and to and we spend so much money on it. That's what I'm saying. We've got to reprioritize those dollars to help folks help themselves instead of continuing to strike them down. I don't know if y'all saw the article about George Floyd today. It was, if you haven't, definitely read it. And it just talks about how he just couldn't get a leg up his entire life. And those are the inequities we need to start looking at in this country and in this state.
All right, thank you. All right, let's move on to the next question. And this has to do with ballot referenda on the November ballot. HR 164 is on our Georgia ballot for November 3rd. It provides a way to dedicate revenue to a specific purpose without a statewide referendum. Do you support Amendment 1 that allows for the dedication of revenue without a statewide referendum, and why? And I'll give you 1 minute for each one of these. And on this, we're going to start with you, Sarah Tyndall Gazelle.
Thank you. Yes, I support this amendment. I've already voted. I've returned my ballot on this because so many times the state legislature will have a special use tax. Those monies go into the general fund, and they do not actually serve the purpose for which they were passed. This bill would allow that. It also has the safeguards where if we are in a financial crisis, we can roll that back. There's also a cap on how much would actually go into these special use funds, but either way, it creates more accountability, right? Our state legislature should be, if they're passing a special use tax, that it should go to that use.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Matt Wilson.
Yes. As Sarah said, I voted today and voted yes, and I publish a voter guide to all my constituents, and it's posted on my campaign website. And I advocate that people vote for this for the very reason that Sarah said. This is about tax transparency, right? The state of Georgia, when you buy a new tire, charges you $1, and supposedly that dollar goes into a environmental cleanup fund. But what you don't know is that the state of Georgia for the last decade has raided that fund and just emptied the jar into the bigger piggy bank, and spent it on funding education and other things. And so this is about fairness and transparency. If we're going to charge you a fee for something and say we're going to spend it on one thing, then we should be held to account for that.
All right, thank you very much. Shay Roberts.
Well, actually, I think I would feel better if they were at least bumping it to pay for public education. But what I'm watching them spend it on is unnecessary litigation, trying to overturn the Affordable Care Act, Roe versus Wade, voting decisions that have been made where absentee ballots can be accepted 3 days after the election if they're postmarked by November 3rd. That's where I don't like money just going into a general fund, and I'm looking at how my tax dollars are being spent, and I don't think that's a great idea. So I would completely support this bill. I do think that we need more transparency in government. That's a huge thing we've been talking about. Voters want to trust the people that are handling their tax dollars, their hard-earned money, and so they should be able to see where that money's going more in a more transparent way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Representative McLaurin.
As has happened many times tonight, I think everybody's done a really good job of explaining what's at stake here. I will just add that I think Representative Wilson, you made a point earlier about tax credits and our need to look at, shine some light on where money is going, right? That's the money out. This is just a good government measure to assess the money in. And so it's important for us to establish transparency anytime we're dealing with taxpayer money, because we understand it's the utmost priority to be good stewards of it. So I think this is all part of the same mindset, which is good government, and it's a strongly bipartisan measure. So yes, I will support it.
All right, thank you very much. Let's move on to the next question. It's on future actions. This question is again from the Carlisle resident group. What is some of the legislation that we can look forward to? Let me start again. What are some legislation that we can look forward to during the 2021 session related to affordable housing and tenants' rights in Georgia? And which should we be most concerned about? We'll give you 1 minute for each one of these. And on question 8, Representative Wilson, please.
So I think we're going to hit on a lot of the same points again, but I do look forward to supporting what was House Bill 1022, which we just talked about. Again, that is certainly something that I will be working with the sponsor who introduced it last year and to push forward. I'm looking forward to working with Representative McLaurin on his bill again, because that was a fantastic starting point, and to his point, has started a conversation, and it's up to us to keep it going.
All right, thank you very much. Let's move on to Shay Roberts. Your answer.
So another one, since I know I keep hammering on public transit, but I just really think that's an area that we desperately need to improve, and it will help in the whole global approach. And one of the bills that I saw, I can't remember if Representative McLaurin had the House bill, but I know Senator Harrell's bill, where the motor fuel tax could actually be applied now to public transportation projects, not just highways and bridges and roads. And so that one I would love to see move forward so that we can start using some of those tax dollars in a way that benefits making our communities more connectable, which will help with all of that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Representative McLaurin?
I'll start by agreeing again with Rep. Wilson. We're going to say a lot of the same things. But I think just to fine tune what we were saying about revenues a little more directly, in addition to reforming some of these tax credits, we want to be thinking about smart sources of revenue that we can use to plug holes in a budget that is continually threatened by COVID, that does have real strain on it. And for example, this past budget, which Rep. Wilson and I both voted against, it was because, and if I can't speak for him, he'll let me know for sure. But this budget cut $950 million from education, state budget, nearly $1 billion, which that's basically the top expenditure that the state government spends money on is our public schools. And so it's such a drastic and significant cut. Well, you might think from the majority's explanation of that cut that, you know, we can just throw our hands up and say, well, it was COVID, so we just had to cut something. But the truth is we have one of the lowest tobacco taxes in the country. If we had raised the tobacco tax on cigarettes even to the national average, and if we had done a sensible bill on vaping, there was some political antics going on with a proposal to make a tax on vaping, but it wasn't, in our view, sufficient. If we had raised up to the national average, we would have raised several $100 million, and that probably could have prevented us from having to cut from schools. So we got to keep a lookout for this austerity approach to government that's more ideological than anything else, that's based on these simplistic narratives about the role of government and isn't actually based on good policy. That's what we're going to be fighting against.
All right, thank you very much. Sarah Tindall Gazelle.
Well, in addition to what all my colleagues have said, a key piece of legislature that will help promote affordable housing is expanding Medicaid. Too many families have to make the difficult choices of going to the doctor or paying their bills. If you expand Medicaid, that will alleviate a huge amount of financial stress on so many families and giving them access to affordable health care that frees up those funds and helps people remain healthier, remain in the workforce, and access housing as well.
All right, thank you very much. The next question is a little long to give you the background, so if I need to read it again, let me know. If Amendment 1 passes in November, a future effort could seek to dedicate revenue to a state housing trust fund by increasing the real estate transfer tax or recording fee or similar source. States that have been the most successful in addressing affordable housing needs have done so by dedicating a specific source of revenue to this purpose. And Florida has been a leader in this effort, and over the past 25 years has generated $300 million per year to support housing construction, rehabilitation, support to all communities in the state, and provides subsidies for vulnerable populations. Such funds could be distributed statewide to support community-shaped initiatives dedicated to the construction of new affordable housing, rehabilitation of affordable housing, supports for housing that is affordable for seniors and many other vulnerable groups, and that also strengthen local communities and improve family outcomes. So, would you support or oppose a future effort to dedicate revenue to a state housing trust fund by increasing the real estate transfer tax or recording fee or a similar source, and why? And each one of you will get 2 minutes, and we're going to start with Representative Wilson.
I'll say that I absolutely support the intention here, but I'll also admit that I'm not very familiar with the real estate transfer tax or fee right now. So I would like some more information about that. But in principle, this is certainly something that I would support. I think as Sarah and Josh and Shay have mentioned earlier this evening, one of the things that we have to do in this area as we move forward is make sure that we are putting in protections around the measures, especially the economic measures, to protect them from, quite frankly, the budget rating that goes on every year when legislators don't want to cut a special interest tax credit, and so they do it to other communities.
All right, thank you very much. 2 minutes. Shay Roberts.
So I would support an idea like this, and I would like it to be part of that Amendment 1 where it is dedicated to a housing trust fund. And I think there's an opportunity also to make it a collaboration with Georgia Tech or any of our technical colleges around. I know in Alaska, they have a housing trust, and they work with the University of Alaska, and they offer students real world construction experience that can be applied towards a degree or certification. And then all the housing that's built through that program is used to address the affordable housing needs in that area. I think if you could use the funding and have that option, it also helps with our work gap issues right now on technically skilled students and folks in the housing industry. They're struggling to find employees. And so I think I can see a very creative, collaborative use for those funds, and it would all, I can see all kinds of great possibilities with that. So yes, I would support it.
All right, thank you very much. Representative McLaurin.
Thank you. Yes, I would absolutely support some sort of dedicated revenue for a housing trust fund. And I think it makes a lot of sense to tie it to the type of development that could potentially threaten the protection and development of affordable housing. I mean, if you think about the way that we tie other dedicated revenues, taxes and fees, or we should post this amendment, to the types of policy issues that they relate to, right? I mean, it makes sense that as we take one step forward in developing our urban and suburban areas with all kinds of nice development, that we also take a step forward in equity. And I think that this type of dedicated revenue reflects Georgians' commitment to do that. Again, when we think about the role of government at the very root, you can't do any of this without political will. Affordable housing is about, do you want to live by your neighbors? And we express our desire to keep living by our neighbors by dedicating political will, funding, to address the problem. So we have to have some kind of a statewide trust fund in order to really address this problem meaningfully. And I have confidence, I have faith, I'll go a step further, not just would I support this, I have faith that we can recruit rural stakeholders, not just Metro Atlanta stakeholders, in creating the same kind of success as we did with the low income housing tax credit. And you see with that success story, you've got development all over the state, Stockbridge, Thomaston, Cedartown. It's not just the inside the perimeter that we're talking about. And so if we can recruit rural stakeholders and make everybody realize that there's a statewide interest in investing as a state in affordable housing, I think we see movement in the General Assembly.
All right, thank you very much. Sarah Tindall Gazelle.
At the end of the line, I'm not sure there's much left to be said because my colleagues have really stated it so beautifully. This absolutely needs to happen at some level. I can't define it tonight, but there have been so many fantastic ideas coming out here. I'm really excited about working in the State House with my colleagues next year to make sure that we do develop a trust fund.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question from the Carlisle Residents Alliance. If elected, could you commit to a quarterly newsletter accessible by both renters and homeowners alike? And we each have 1 minute on it. And I'm going to start with you, Sarah Tindall Gazelle.
I will commit not only to a newsletter, but also to, as soon as it's safe to do so, in-person town hall meetings for exactly that, because I don't want to just tell folks. I want to hear from people. I want to hear from my constituents what their priorities are, what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, what they need from me.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Wilson.
Absolutely. This is something that I already do. I send out a regular email every week at least during session, and then in the off season as well, just updating my constituents on what's going on. I also post it on my website so that others can view it, and we'll continue to do that. And as Sarah mentioned, it goes beyond just that. When I ran for the first time in 2018, I made a commitment to have town halls. That was something that my voters demanded of me because they had not had that in the past. And so I had 11 town halls over the last 2 years since I was elected, and would have had more if it weren't for the pandemic. So that's absolutely something I'll continue to do.
All right, Shay Roberts.
Absolutely. I have no problem doing a newsletter at least quarterly, and the town halls as well. I have made it perfectly clear throughout my campaigning for the last 3 years that transparency and accessibility, I feel like the number one job I have is to listen and be accessible to the public who elects me. And so I will make every effort to make that easy for them to get to me.
All right, thank you very much. Representative McLaurin.
Sure. I will commit to a quarterly newsletter next term. And just as importantly, I think we have to be accessible in the ways that are useful to people, right? And one of the things I worry about with email sometimes is you clog somebody's inbox, they get, particularly if they're politically involved, they get 50 political emails a day. And so when it comes to critical information, finding ways to deliver that information effectively. Social media can be a way to do that, Twitter, Facebook. I actually don't have an Instagram, and I get a lot of criticism for that. But at some point I've got to transition to, self-image of old fogey. So I think this is my way of doing that. But just in general, I think, as long as you're responsive and when people show up with issues, you take a sincere interest. I think that's what's being asked of us, and that's what I try to do.
All right, thank you very much. Now, our last question is for the evening. Do you support the statewide referendum on the ballot allowing Habitat for Humanity and other nonprofit organizations that develop affordable housing for low-income families qualifying for zero-interest loans to hold the developed property tax-free until they convey the home to the new homeowner? And we'll give you 1 minute for each one. And we're going to start with you again, Representative McLaurin.
Having trouble unmuting. Yes, I do support this, have already voted yes on it. And again, this goes back to the idea that we have to be jealous of the tools we have, and we have to be innovative and creative in thinking of more tools. Anything we can do to diversify the stock of housing available to families and to allow it to be easier to invest in those diverse ideas is something that I presumptively am going to favor. And this is one of those policies.
All right, thank you. Sarah Tindall Gazelle.
Yes, I voted yes on this. And in fact, just a week ago, I participated in a high school forum with local Habitat Club. And there was a representative from Habitat on there who very helpfully explained that one of the benefits of this tax exemption is that they can use those funds that would otherwise be spent paying taxes on investing in the builds that they're doing. There's an enormous upfront cost to conduct these builds. So these tax dollars that they're saving can be used to build more houses so that more people can have access to them. And I think that is an extraordinarily good use of foregone tax dollars, and I support it wholeheartedly.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Wilson.
Yes, and I've already voted for it, and I'll echo what Josh and Sarah did or said, but not to belabor the point. I'll let Shay go.
All righty, go ahead, Shay Roberts.
I I too have already voted yes on this issue and support it, and don't really have too much more to add. We'll just go ditto. How's that?
All righty. Well, thank you very much. That wraps up our program, believe it or not. Thank you, candidates, for your willingness to be a part of this forum tonight. I also thank you for your willingness to serve as representatives of your community. And I'll just turn this program back over to Melanie Couchman so she gives the final word. You'll have to unmute. It's always hard to remember.
Okay. Thank you, Donna, for moderating, and thank you again to the candidates who helped us this evening. If you joined us late, we invited 8 candidates and these 4 accepted. Also, I want to remind you that early voting begins on Monday, October 12th. For those of you watching, we hope this has been an informative forum. Sandy Springs Together takes pride in our ability to hold elected officials accountable, educate the public, and create change as an advocate for affordable housing for everyone in our city. Please have a great evening, and thank you so much for joining us.